We all know Warren Buffett is a genius. But did you know that virtually all of his massive fortune, we're talking over 142 billion of it, was earned after he turned 50 years old? The real secret to his success isn't stock picking. It's a simple behavioral skill that anyone can master. Proving that financial success has a lot less to do with how smart you are and a lot more to do with how you behave. If you want to know what that simple behavioral skill is, then stay tuned. This episode is for you.
Welcome to the Kyle Mackie podcast, your weekly dose of clarity, energy, and inspiration. Kyle unpacks lessons from the world's top minds so we can all grow together. Grab your coffee, lock in, and let's make it happen.
So, you want to know that simple behavioral skill? Well, the core theory outlined in the book, The Psychology of Money, asserts that doing well with money has way less to do with formal intelligence and much more to do with how you behave. The author, Morgan Housel, a finance writer who has spent years covering behavioral finance, puts out this core problem and solution, which is that the world mistakenly treats finance like physics, a hard science with perfect rules, when the reality is that financial success is a soft skill, driven by chaotic human behavior and emotions. And the solution is recognizing that behavioral skills like patience, humility, and longevity are the most critical factors for achieving success. So in today's episode, we're going to explore 6 essential psychological concepts that are covered in this book. There's a lot more concepts. So if you want to get, all 19 of them, I think there is, definitely want to check out the book. But ultimately, we're going to go over why no one's crazy in their money views, how time and compounding beat genius, why we must confront the profound dangers of never having enough, why luck and risk are siblings, why time control is the highest form of wealth, and why it's always better to be reasonable than coldly rational when planning. So to kick things off with the concept that no one's crazy when it comes to money. Every individual goes through life anchored to unique, valid views about how money works. Views shaped by their personal experiences and when and where they grew up. That's why financial choices that look absolutely nuts to you might make perfect sense to someone else, because they are acting based on their equally persuasive yet different life lessons. The life that I had growing up and the way I saw my father with money versus the way somebody else grew up and the way their father or parents treated money would have completely different impacts on the way they approach things as an adult. I grew up in a household where we didn't have a lot of money. I think until, I wouldn't say we ever had a ton of money growing up, but we had no money until maybe about 12 years old. My dad didn't get a good job didn't get a good paying job until around that time frame. And at that point, things started to change. But I can just remember growing up, my dad every week being at the kitchen table with his notebook, checking his budget, going through money. And, we were very, very frugal. We still did a lot of cool things. We still took family trips and stuff, but they really thought about how we were going to make the money work. And so that had definitely a huge impact on the way that I have approached money, especially through my, late teens, early 20s. Now in my 30s, I'm in a completely different financial position than where my parents were at similar ages. So I'm starting to treat money in a slightly different way, but definitely a lot of the, not necessarily lessons, but the things that I saw growing up have definitely impacted the way that I treat money and view money than, other people of similar age who have maybe had the exact same success, less success, more success, but, just grew up in a completely different household. Like, I'm sure if you grew up in a household where, you had multi-millionaire parents, I'm sure you would think of money in a completely different sense than somebody who grew up in a household with, where they were barely scraping by. But understanding that people's willingness to bear risk is heavily tied to their personal history, independent of intelligence or education, helps eliminate judgment. What you've personally experienced with money makes up maybe 80% of how you think the world works. I have quite a few examples of, the differences from one person's situation to another. But one of the most vastly different, which a lot of people would probably think would be the exact opposite, sort of shows how wealth and, being rich and having high income are completely different. The comparison of Ronald Reed, who's a janitor, and Richard Fiscone, who is a Harvard-educated executive, shows that Reed's patience and frugality beat Fiscone's greed and leverage, which ultimately helped him successfully eclipse that massive education gap. Reed worked as a janitor and a gas station attendant. He bought a 2-bedroom house for $12,000. That'd be amazing if we could buy a house for $12,000 nowadays. But he ultimately died with a net worth of over $8 million because he saved what little he could and invested in blue chip stocks, waiting decades for compounding. Whereas Fiscone, a Harvard-educated Merrill Lynch executive, borrowed heavily to maintain an 18,000 square foot mansion with 11 bathrooms. I have no clue why somebody would ever need 11 bathrooms. And 2 pools. Again, I have no clue why you would need 2 pools. Maybe an indoor one, an outdoor one. Oh, that might seem like it. Yep. We need 2 pools, one inside and one outside. Because you can't swim outside when it's raining. That would just not work. Although maybe it was a really cold place. Anyways, I'm digressing from the main point here. But yeah, he had the 11 bathrooms, the 2 pools, but he ultimately had a bankruptcy and foreclosure in 2008 when the housing crisis hit, or the economic crisis hit in the U.S. at that time. So 2 people, completely different upbringings, to completely different education levels, to completely different incomes, yet one person ends up with $8 million when they die, and the other person went bankrupt. Who knows? He might have been able to recover, but you'll learn from more lessons in actually just the next lesson that we're going to cover, that having your whole life is a much better tool to becoming wealthy than having to recover after losing everything in a bankruptcy. Secondly, people's investments decisions are heavily anchored to the experiences they had in their own generation. And for instance, someone born in the 1960s in the States experienced inflation sending prices up more than 3 times during their impressionable years. They will view assets like bonds differently than someone born in, say, like my year, 1990, where inflation has been pretty low my whole life. I'd say right now is where inflation seems to be the most crazy. just going out to eat just like a year ago seemed like super reasonable, and now it seems like 50% more expensive. I always said New Zealand is a cheap place to eat out. It made no sense. Our groceries are through the roof. They've been here since I've lived here. Yet eating out always seemed very, very cheap, like to the point where I didn't understand how restaurants could do it after paying rent and staffing and the food costs themselves. But yeah, that's definitely changed over the last few years. But yeah, growing up in a time of, a recession, inflation, depressions, war times, whatever it is that you're going through, it's going to greatly impact your views of money than somebody who grows up even just 10 years later, 20 years later, 30 years later. So the way that your parents view money in the time frame that they grew up and the way you view money are going to be different. There's no way that they're going to be the same, because no person experiences life in the same way from one generation to the next. Another example of this is that Americans spend more on lottery tickets than on movies, music, books combined. And the lowest income households spend an average of $412 a year, 4 times the amount by the highest income groups. For many low-income people, buying a lottery ticket is the only time they can hold a tangible dream of achieving the good life that higher earners already have and take for granted. To me, it's quite sad that people spend all this money on, this dream life that they think would be so great, where if they just invested that $412 a year like Ronald Reed, the janitor, they actually could have millions of dollars in the later years of their life. Having gambled a lot in my early years, ironically, when I had very little money, I can totally understand how, your income level can greatly impact the way that you treat money. Again, when you have very little, you have less to lose. Spending that $412, it gives you that chance. Oh, I might be rich. But if you're really, really wealthy, $412 is nothing. But if you spent like a proportion, it's like, I worked really hard for this money. I don't want to lose that same proportionate thing. That's sort of the view I have now. Is like, I've worked hard for the money that I have, and it's not worth the gamble to even potentially lose any of it for, a little bit more. But yeah, the next concept though that we're going to cover is that confounding compounding and getting wealthy versus staying wealthy. Getting rich requires risk and optimism, but staying wealthy requires the exact opposite. It requires humility, frugality, and paranoia that what you've made can be taken away very quickly. Now, since compounding is unintuitive, our brains prefer linear thinking over exponential thinking. The most important factor, though, is longevity and the ability to stick around for decades without wiping out. The single most powerful factor in long-term financial success is longevity. Survival is the cornerstone of strategy, and very few gains are worth taking a risk that could wipe you out. People do it, but I would say majority of those people probably regret it. I'm sure there were some people who put everything they had into Bitcoin and, it worked out for them. But those people, if they don't learn the things that they need to stay wealthy, are very likely the people that could possibly put it all in on some sort of new technology or financial asset class and lose it all, such as people who put tons of money into NFTs. It might have been the same people who made all that money on Bitcoin. They throw it all in NFTs and they lose it all. An example of how longevity is one of the keys to getting wealthy is of Warren Buffett's massive net worth. So when the book was written, which I think was about 2020, maybe 2018, his net worth was $84.5 billion. I just checked before recording this episode. He's currently sitting at $142.5 billion USD as his net worth. That is wild. But the craziest thing about that is that it would be $142.2 billion of those dollars all came after his 50th birthday. That's wild. So at his 50th birthday, he was still in the hundreds of millions of dollars, which is still amazing. But 142.2 of those $1 billion came after he was 50. So for those of you who think that, it's too late, you're too old, there's no way you can have those benefits of compounding because it's too late, you still probably have plenty of time to actually realize some of the benefits of a long-term outlook versus trying to get rich quick. But going into this, if he would have started investing in his 30s and retired in his 60s, still earning his extraordinary annual return, which I think was around 22% on average for his whole life, which is wild. I think S&P 500 is like 12 or 14% on average. So he did 50% to 100% more, depending on what it actually is, for his whole investing career, which is great. It's not the most. In the book, it talks about another who's started investing in his 50s, but has averaged like 60-something% into his 90s and is worth still a crazy amount of money. But, that 22% over an extremely long time has led Warren Buffett to be one of the richest people in the world. But yeah, his net worth today would be 99.9% less at only $11.9 million if he would have retired in his 60s and only started investing in his 30s based off his skills of getting that return of 22%. So his secret is time. So if you haven't started investing, it's never too late to start. I wish I would have invested in my 20s. I didn't. I tried too many businesses and traveled way too much, and the businesses all failed. But, finally in my 30s, I'm 35. I've had the chance to finally start investing. And the money that I've put in, my plan is to not take out potentially ever. I don't really want to retire. I just want to be able to retire if I need to for, health reasons, for other different things. But just having that safety net there in the case that I need it is sort of why I have it there, which, talking about, I think it's going to be concept 6, just having the money there invested for that rainy day. It's what gives you the ability to live a little bit more freely and try new things. An example of playing the long game and not being in a hurry is more beneficial is an example of Warren Buffett. One of his partners, Rick Guerin, was an equally smart partner of both Buffett and Buffett's other partner, Munger. But he was in a hurry. So in the 1973-1974 market turndown, Guerin was leveraged with margin loans. And he was forced to sell his Berkshire stocks, which Buffett actually bought for under $40 a share. But by forcing to sell, he interrupted that compounding process that made his partners vastly wealthy over time. And as a result, Rick missed out. So if he would have just stayed patient, never went into leverage, never taking out those loans, but just played the exact same game as both Buffett and Munger, he would have been just as wealthy. But instead, risking it to try to speed the process up, not playing the time game, he ended up being much less wealthy. And so a non-financial example of how things can change if you give yourself enough time is ice ages and how they demonstrate compounding. They are caused by not violently cold winters, but by moderately cool summers. When a summer never gets warm enough to melt the previous winter's snow, the leftover ice base makes it easier for snow to accumulate, eventually resulting in a continental ice sheet. This shows how a small starting base, a thin layer of snow, a little bit of money, can compound into enormous, logic-defying results. So apparently we went through like 6 different ice ages, but the reason for it is the slow, cool summers, not extremely cold winters. And you can very easily equate that into money. It's by keep on going through the highs and the lows that overall in the average, it grows into this great level of wealth. Now, a problem that I see a lot of people get into when they start having success in life is that they never are quite satisfied with having enough. It's the biggest danger in finance, is succeeding without knowing when to stop, leading people to risk what they did have and did need for money they didn't have and didn't need. The hardest financial skill is getting the goalpost of expectations to stop moving, because rising expectations negate satisfaction. I think one of the biggest problems we have as society right now is social comparison. And it's a core problem with what we're discussing, as the ceiling of wealth is so high that the battle to keep up can never be won. Spending beyond covering reasonable needs often reflects the ego trying to prove something to others. So on Instagram and Facebook and all these social medias, people showing off their fancy cars and jewelry and all these different things. I really don't even know what they put on there anymore because I don't really go on Instagram and all that stuff. But by looking at all these people with all these expensive things, it makes you constantly feel like you need more, you need more, you need more. But none of that stuff's going to make you happier in the end. But people still keep striving for what other people have and making their goalposts that person has a bigger house than me. I want a bigger house. The house you have is probably big enough. I moved from a 2-bedroom apartment to a 2-bedroom house. And just having that little extra space, it's nice at times. It's nice because I can finally set up the studio. But really, it's just more space I actually have to clean up. It's sort of nice having a smaller place. The guy who had that 11-bathroom house and 2 pools, like 2 pools sounds sort of cool, but 11 bathrooms, like I don't think I've ever had 11 people over to my house at once. And even if I did have 11 people over to my house, they don't all need a bathroom. And I sure as hell am never having 11 kids. If I do, something's gone crazy. That'd be crazy having, I don't even know what you call, not twins, but the 11 kid version of that. That'd be wild. If you have like 3 triplets, 1 quadruplet, damn, that'd be wild. But anyways, I'm getting off subject there. But yeah, comparison to other people, it's such a dangerous thing. And moving those goalposts because you feel you don't have enough, because your ego's not satisfied, it's a very, very dangerous thing that all of us can face in our lifetimes. I didn't actually write this down as an example, but reflecting back into the book, actually, there was an example back in like the 50s, 60s, maybe even to the 70s. I think it was pretty much up until the 80s. I think 80s is where it started to shift. But social comparison was not as much of a thing. And part of the reason why that was because especially in the States, your middle class was such a vast amount. Even your people at the poorest level, they were keeping up at a rate that was still fairly comparable to the richest people. And like it talked about, like a top car for people on the poor end was like a Chevrolet. And for the rich people, it was like what is it? Oh, why am I drawing a blank here? A Cadillac. Yeah, a Cadillac. Like, a Cadillac's not that much nicer than a Camry, and I'm sure with all the extra little bells and whistles in there, it honestly wasn't much different of a car. Just probably aesthetically looked a little bit different, maybe nicer, like seating, like leather. I don't even know what it would have been. Like, if you look at old cars, they all sort of look quite similar. But rich and people a little bit middle class and the low class, they were all at a very similar trajectory. Where now, I think it was around 87 or 89 is where things just started to exponentially get different between the wealthiest and lower. And so people are striving that American dream where they always want to have what the richest people have because they think it's going to give them, a much greater life. But the truth is that all those extra material things are never going to change your life. They're never going to make your life better. So realizing that you have enough already, or if you don't, figuring out what enough is, and then when you reach there, not trying to think, this isn't enough, I need even more, that's what you need to do. So it'd be nice if the rich and the middle class and the low class were all more similar, and we didn't have that comparison. But with things shifting so much and social media constantly being on our face, it's really hard not to. So if I could make a suggestion there, let's say a social media detox. Try to not be on there. I make it so I cannot look at any of that on my phone while I'm at home. Only when I'm out and about where I probably don't want to be on it as much. And then there's literally no comparison. But some examples from the book that I did write down. So there's Rajat Gupta. He was a former CEO of McKinsey, which was already worth over $100 million. And he risked his entire reputation and freedom because he desperately wanted to be in the billionaire club or the billionaire circle. He used his Goldman Sachs board position to illegally tip a hedge fund manager about a Warren Buffett deal, resulting in a quick $1 million profit. And as a result, he went to jail. So it doesn't even matter how much money you have. If you have $100 in your bank account, $1,000 in your bank account, 10,000, 100,000, a million, whatever it is. But to get an extra 1% to do something illegal, that seems crazy. But if you want to be a billionaire and you're only at 100 million, maybe you'll do some crazy things to keep reaching for that goalpost that is super, super, super far out of sight. Another example of somebody not having enough is Bernie Madoff. This is a name that people probably are more familiar with, definitely a name that I knew more of because everybody knows him for his nice Ponzi scheme. But he actually ran a hugely successful, legitimate market-making business that earned between $25 and $50 million per year. But despite the legitimate wealth, Madoff still pursued his massive Ponzi scheme, illustrating an extreme lack of sense of enough. Like, I'm sure that Ponzi scheme brought in a ton of money, but if I was already bringing in 25 to 50, maybe he's not profiting that. I don't know how much he was profiting, but he's probably still profiting a fair bit. I'm pretty sure you're good. And this is a while ago too. So, in today's day and age, that'd be worth even more money. And then another example, so brilliant hedge fund managers at a company called Long-Term Capital Management, LTCM. They were already personally worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but they took on extreme leverage in the quest for more. And they risked what was important to them, having a stable life with houses and being able to take care of their family and have the time to do what they want to do, although I'm pretty sure hedge fund managers work crazy hours. But they took on this extreme leverage and quest for that more and risking what's important to them so that something unimportant wiped them out in 1998 in the middle of a strong bull market. To be honest, I can totally see where people come from with the not having enough. For the longest time, especially when I didn't have any money, I always wanted more. Weirdly enough, now that I'm in a better financial situation, the financial goalpost, it doesn't really move all that much. I don't think having more money is going to change my life. It's more about achievements, which is, the thing I sometimes feel like I don't have enough of, even though, again, I've achieved a fair bit in my life. But I can't understand why people do these crazy things for a little bit extra money when they're probably already living a fairly good life. So it's wild to think that people do this. And I don't think it matters if you have 100,000 in your, investments, 1 million in your investments, hundreds of millions. At a certain point, especially when, like right now, I feel like if I stopped working and I focused on something completely, like if I shut down this business line, I focused on something completely different, I could probably get realistically 5 years before I'd have to pick up a job if I didn't have any more success. But just having that freedom, which again, we're going to talk about in a little bit more, is way more than enough than risking it all for maybe an extra 50%. Definitely more. I wouldn't risk it for 1%. That seems absolutely absurd. But yeah, the next concept we're covering is that luck and risk, and that tails you in. Luck and risk are siblings. They are both the reality that every outcome is guided by forces other than individuals' effort. And tail events, the rare outlying outcomes, have tremendous influence in finance, meaning that a small number of actions or investments account for the majority of successes. Failure is the norm, so you need to build room for error into your financial plan to endure expected failures, allowing you to remain in the game for the few massive outlier successes. I have quite a few examples of this here, but Bill Gates is a really good example of this. The story in the book goes into it a little bit more detail, but he was like 1 in a million luck, and even more so because, ironically, one of the people that was at the same school had 1 in a million bad luck as well. And that could have happened to Bill Gates, and we would have had a completely different will. But Bill Gates was extremely lucky to happen to attend one of the only schools in the world that had an advanced computer terminal in 1968. Like, I'm pretty sure growing up, I think we got a lot of computers in our school, maybe in like grade 4, grade 5. It was pretty cool. I remember in like grade 6 joining the computer club, and we had just a little room with some extra computers there. And maybe in the last year or 7 or 8, it was like a pretty big room. But that was in the 90s. So in the 60s, the only school in the world with an advanced computer, Bill Gates was at. So of all the children out there, he was pretty lucky to happen to be attending this. Also pretty lucky that he actually enjoyed playing around with the computers. Now, his equally skilled friend, Kent Evans, who was scheming with him to start a business, experienced also a 1 in a million risk when he died in a mountaineering accident before they could start Microsoft. The odds of being killed on a mountain in high school are roughly 1 in a million. So they both essentially had these luck and risk that had completely different trajectories on their life. One got to be one of the richest people in the world and start a company that has impacted all of us, every single person on this planet, and somebody who never had that just because of a risk that he took, mountaineering, and it went bad. Another example of this is an index that I've never even heard of before, but apparently there's an index called the Russell 3000, which increased more than 73 times 73-fold since 1980. Yet during that period, 40% of all the component stocks lost at least 70% of their value and never recovered. Effectively, all the index spectacular returns came from just 7% of the component companies that vastly outperformed, proving that a small number of events account for the majority of the outcomes. It's one of the reasons why, if you really look at any of the YouTube investment channels, I know it's never investment advice, and I'm not giving investment advice, but they always just say the best thing is to put it in an index fund and just wait, because it averages out all these businesses that are going to fail, and it gives you the few that are going to do well. And in the end, you turn out with a pretty good return. And it makes sense. Like, if you actually think of businesses fail at an extremely rapid rate. It's like 9 out of 10, I think, fail in the first 10 years, or 95%. It's something pretty high. And I know we have these big businesses that some people think will be around forever. We've got, Google and Amazon and Tesla and Nvidia. These are huge companies worth in the trillions of dollars, Apple. But they might not be around forever. Let's say Apple never figures out AI. If they can't figure it out, they could go to zero one day. Yeah, they have all these cool devices. They have their computers. They have all these other things. But if AI truly takes over and they never quite figure it out because they've been failing at it for years, and now they're so far behind the game, that $1 trillion company could go down to zero. So if you're like fully invested in that one company, yeah, they might figure it out and you might still have success, but you also could lose it all. But if you're invested in the S&P 500, which has all those different companies, plus a bunch of other ones, which might end up having more success than some of them at the top, even if Apple were to fall out of it, you're still good. You're still going to have a relatively good return. And going back to Warren Buffett, he stated that he owned between 400 and 500 different stocks during his life, but made most of his money on only 10 of them. His partner, Charlie Munger, added that removing just a few of Berkshire's top investments makes its long-term track record pretty average. So again, they average 22% return. But if you take out even just one or two of those top 10, that probably drastically drops that money down. So again, you can take that risk and be all in on, one company. And if you do, you might make an insane amount of money. But if you want to stay wealthy and you want to keep that money, you need to probably be diversified. So that way you get some of those wins, but you also negate some of those losses. The next concept is actually quite closely tied to last episode's podcast, Buy Back Your Time. And it's that freedom and wealth is what you don't see. The highest form of wealth is the ability to wake up every morning and say, I can do whatever I want today. Money's greatest intrinsic value is the ability to give you control over your time. The independence and autonomy derived from unspent assets. Wealth is what you don't see. It is the hidden income not spent, representing assets that haven't been converted into visible material possessions. It talks about this thing called the man in the car paradox, which shows that using money to buy fancy things rarely brings you respect you seek. People only admire the object, not the owner. And the example they use in the book for this, again, I didn't write it down, but I have it in my head. It's there was a valet driver, and he'd see people come in with their cars all day long, and sometimes people would come in with these really expensive $100,000 cars, $250,000 cars. He never noticed the people. He noticed the car. He was always thinking about how cool the car was, not how cool the person in the car was, how cool the car was. The person in the car might be thinking that he's cool, but he wasn't. And if you actually think about yourself, and when you notice people with all these different things, how often do you think that person's cool? I think the rare exception in my mind is when people do cool shit. So when they have cool experiences, to me, That's what I like to spend my money on. I like to do experiences. That's worth the money. But it's something for me. And when you happen to hear about those things, it's pretty cool. But when I see somebody with a really expensive car, I might be like, wow, that's a nice car. But I've never been like, wow, that's a cool guy driving that car. I'll be honest, I couldn't give a shit what the guy is driving. I don't really like cars. So that's even more so probably why it doesn't impress me. Although there are some really cool electric cars nowadays. Electric cars are getting pretty cool. There's like this Chinese one. I don't know. S9 something. It's fast. Goes like 400 something kilometers an hour, which is wild. But again, if I saw somebody in that car, wouldn't think anything of them. But if I saw that car, I'd be like, damn, that's a fast car. But anyways, some more examples of this. Entrepreneur Derek Sivers, he saved $12,000 in 2 years from his low-paying Manhattan job, and he felt rich and free when he reached this amount because it was enough to quit his job, control his time, and become a full-time musician, needing only a few gigs per month to cover his costs. My guess this is not a very recent story. $12,000 nowadays would not last you a full year. But whatever that amount of money is, if you can save that and it allows you to go and do these other things and try something new because it gives you that financial freedom, even if it's not a crazy amount of money, that's pretty cool. And then this guy, as I said, an entrepreneur, the later sale of his company didn't make a big difference as the change happened when he was 22. So once he just had enough to be able to have that financial freedom, that's all he needed. Going back to the story about the valet driver, but we judge wealth by outward appearances. But the only thing you know for certain when seeing someone drive a $100,000 car is that they now have $100,000 less than they did before the purchase, or they have $100,000 more debt. Wealth is unspent income. Spending money is literally opposite of being wealthy. And a small emergency fund translates more directly into time control. 6 months emergency expenses means you're not terrified of your boss because you know you won't be ruined if you need to take time off to find a new job. This flexibility is the most powerful common denominator of happiness, more so than salary or prestige. Imagine you were let go and you had no savings whatsoever. You're going to have to take the first job that you get offered because you need the money. But if you have 6 months worth of savings and you can wait 6 months, you can look for a job you actually want to take that's going to be maybe your dream job. And then maybe being let go or because of the economic downturns and stuff is like the greatest gift ever because it actually got you closer to what you want to be doing. But again, if you don't have that economic freedom because you have nothing saved, it doesn't allow you to do the things you want to do, find the jobs you want to have, take the trips that you want to take. You know, maybe you get let go and you have that money sitting there and you're like, I've always wanted to do this trip. Maybe this is the perfect time to do it because you have that time and you have that financial flexibility and comfort knowing that there's money sitting there. For me, I think this is, right now, being that I've been able to save money over the last 4.5 years living here in New Zealand, it's the thing that gives me the comfort knowing that I can start a new venture. And I've made it known that, come April, I'm going down this other path. I have the money to sit there to keep me afloat if I need to use it. My goal is that I just make money from the new venture and I don't have to touch it at all. That is the goal. But the reason I can say, hey, I'm going to step away from this is because I have that financial backing that even if shit hits the fan, even if I use 1 year's worth of salary from there and to keep me afloat, I still have, again, 4-ish years that I have it there. So even if it takes a couple years. And another example of this is when I was in my early 20s. Again, I had one of my best paying jobs was from 20 to 22. I was selling personal training. I was making really good money. I'd saved enough for a deposit on a house. And that money was sitting there. It was really nice savings. It was the most savings I had. I think it was maybe somewhere 30 to 40 grand, which at the time was enough to buy a condo, put the down payment of a condo in Ottawa. Would have been cool now. That would have probably doubled or tripled in value. But honestly, having that money there and being able to go travel was one of the best things. But if I never saved for that, then when I start getting into this, because I was not in the best headspace, I was starting to make decisions for money, and I'm like, this is not the way to do this. And then making a decision for happiness and not worrying much about the money. I don't know if this even applies totally, but having that financial flexibility made that all possible. So again, saving just to save it, so you have an emergency fund. So if things hit the fan, shit hits the fan, you're in an okay situation. That's an awesome place to put yourself. And the last concept we're going to cover before wrapping things up is the concept that reasonable is better than being rational and having room for error. You don't want to aim to be coldly rational, mathematically optimal, but you want to aim to be reasonable. Adopt a strategy you can actually stick with long term. A plan that helps you sleep at night is superior to a mathematically perfect one you abandon during stress. You need to have room for error, or a margin of safety is crucial for navigating a world of uncertainty. It is your hedge against the unforeseen, ensuring you can survive financial equivalent of field mice chewing the wire, which I'm going to talk about as one of the examples. That no risk can wipe you out is even worth taking. Again, I started investing 2 years ago. I should have invested right from my time here, but I only started investing about 2 years ago. And my investments have done quite well. But the other day, I made a fairly large investment, and almost instantly, it dropped 6-7%, which was tough to see. But the truth of the matter is, I don't plan to touch that money for a long time. So I'm okay with that instant drop, because the strategy is to hold on to it for the long game. And by having that room for error there, that it can drop, and it can happen in anything. You could buy, your first investment into S&P 500 and it could crash the next day. You can invest in Bitcoin. You can invest in gold. You should invest in any of those in just one. Again, not a financial advisor, but if anything happens to any one thing, Bitcoin we don't know as much about. It could, in theory, drop and never recover. The stock market is probably never going to do that. Gold is never going to do that. There's things that have been around historically, although this book says not to necessarily look at the historic result of things, because historic doesn't mean that it's going to be like that forever. But yeah, the other investments have done well enough over the past few years that even if I look at it as a whole, even with that 6-7% loss, even if I lost 30% on everything, which is realistically the most it would ever drop, I'm still up overall. And so knowing that even in a worst case scenario, I'm still up overall, that's a pretty good thing. So there's room for error in there. If it goes wildly wrong, it's not the end of the day. I'm still better off today, even if I lost 30% of what I've invested, because I've had success in it, and I've have that now room for error there, that not reacting to be like, I'm going to pull that money right out because I lost 6 or 7% instantly. Just leave it there, because over time, the long run, it will recover. Not should recover, it will recover. Some examples from the book, though, about being reasonable versus which is greater than rational, and having that room for error. So Harry Markowitz is a Nobel Prize winner and for the modern portfolio theory, and was asked how he invested his own money. He explained that he split his contributions 50-50 between stock and bond because he wanted to minimize his future regret, avoiding major loss if the market crashed, but also avoiding missing out if it soared. And that seems like a reasonable thing to do. You're there for the good, you're there for the bad. Most financial advisors would say you want to spread it out amongst different things, probably not just 50-50 of two things, but you're there for the good, you're there for the bad. And if you ride it out for the long run, you'll get the best of both, hopefully. Some research apparently rationally argued that young savers, so if you're maybe like in your teens, your 20s, I'm not sure what the age that they use, I can't remember, but they should use a 2-to-1 debt to leverage on stocks. They showed that even if a 50% market drop wiped out the account, the saver would still be better off long-term if they followed the plan undeterred. And this is absurdly unreasonable in reality, as virtually no person could watch 100% of their retirement account evaporate and carry on with the strategy. That would be crazy. You have everything wiped out and you just keep repeating the same thing. But apparently, in theory, it actually would be a great idea. In actuality, it would be a very tough thing to do. But maybe it is the best thing. But again, it's just not realistic, because when somebody sees everything getting wiped out, they're going to be feeling like they're in ruins. So it's better to do what's going to make it so you can sleep at night and not do something absurdly unreasonable, because it's going to make you feel better. But a really cool example, not related to money, that if we talked about earlier, the field mice chewing the wiring. In the Battle of Stalingrad in World War II, a German tank unit was rendered useless because field mice had chewed through the electrical insulation. And this defeat by the unpredictable shows that you must save for things that are too crazy to cross your mind, as avoiding single points of failure is vital. It was like, I want to say like 90% of their tanks didn't work when they needed them. And it was because they parked them in a field with mice, and mice chewed up all the wiring. They were just there a little bit too long, but nobody plans that a mice is going to take out a tank. Tank are supposed to be like nearly indestructible, yet mice are taking them out. I think that's wild. But when it comes back to finances, you just need to plan for things that you can't plan for. If you're going all in on Bitcoin and it did go to zero, your whole future is crushed. You know, up until recently, I've always held a fairly high amount in the bank account just in case, you know, things go wrong. I have a safety net there. Now that I don't have employees, I don't have to keep it as crazy high, but still knowing that, you know, I have access to it. And if something goes wrong, I can pull the money out. Actually, this is where like not having a house is actually quite nice. In New Zealand, people love investing in houses, which I understand it's been a good asset class to own in this country historically. But if you need the money quickly, it's not a great asset to be in, because it takes a lot of work to sell a house, and you can't just sell a portion of it. You got to sell the whole thing. So where other things can, you know, go up just at the same rate as houses can, you have that peace of mind knowing that you don't have to, you know, get rid of everything if things start to go bad. So if you have a house and, you know, that is your everything, it's your plan for retirement to save that house, but you don't have any backup savings and you lose your job, then you're like scrambling, how do I pay for this? You know, that's not really planning for room for error. But if you have, you know, an extra $100,000 in your account and you have the house, you know, you can probably go a year still paying your mortgage and stuff to find that job that's perfect for you and not have to worry about selling that house. So whatever your plan is, being reasonable is better than being rational. Having room for error is what you need to do. So in the end, to master the psychology, I said it right this time, psychology of money, you must adopt a mentality where financial volatility and loss are viewed as unavoidable prices of admission or a fee for long-term growth. This requires prioritizing survival, longevity, and utilizing a large margin of safety to endure expected chaos. In finance, it's never going to go the way you always expect. Almost no one always gets it right. I'm going to say no one always gets it right. Maybe there has been somebody who's only gotten it right, but for the most part, that's not the case. And the framework of what this book encourages a barbelled personality, which is a dual mindset that requires you to be wildly optimistic about long-term growth, accepting that progress happens amid loss, while being simultaneously intensely paranoid about the short-term risks that could lead to ruin. The framework guarantees that psychological durability needed for the magic of compounding to work. So the long-term outcome of mastering the psychology is attaining financial independence. And the highest form of wealth is control over your time. The ability to do what you want, when you want, with who you want, for as long as you want. So to wrap things up, the 5 things that I think are probably the biggest takeaways from this book, from today's podcast, are as followed. Starting off with, wealth is hidden income not spent. It is the financial assets that have not been converted into visible material possessions. Just because somebody has a fancy car, a big house, does not mean they're wealthy. Might mean they're rich, but does not mean they're wealthy. It goes into a difference between rich and wealthy in the book. You want to aim to be reasonable, not coldly rational. A financial plan you can stick with for decades is superior to a mathematically optimal one you abandon during stress. When all your money is disappearing because the stock market's crashing and you're all in on just one stock, it's hard not to stress about it. So having a plan that's reasonable, that allows you to sleep at night, that's the better plan. The single most powerful thing you can do is increase your time horizon, as time causes small things to grow big and big mistakes to fade away. So if you can plan for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years into the future, that's when you're going to become the most wealthy. The longer time you give yourself, the wealthier you'll become. When Warren Buffett was my age, he only was worth a couple $1 million. It's more than I have. I'm more like what he was at like 28 years old. But take 7 years off that. If I can get to 7 years back from where what he was up to at like I don't know how old he is. I'm guessing he's somewhere in his mid 90s. But like if I'll get to the same like late 80s wealth of his, damn, that's wealthy. I have no desire to be that wealthy. My life will be totally the same, way less wealthy than that. But define the cost of success in investing as volatility and doubt, and be willing to pay the market fee rather than viewing setbacks as a fine to be avoided. You're going to have setbacks. Don't feel like it's a punishment or a fine. Fines sound a lot worse than fees. That's why he uses those words there. But being in the market is a fee rather than a fine when you have those losses. And savings without a specific goal is a crucial hedge against life's inevitable ability to surprise you at the worst moments. Shit is going to happen. You're going to lose your job. A business is going to fail. Houses are going to have things pop up. Your roof is going to leak. A pipe is going to burst. Shit is going to happen. But when you have a nice chunk of money in reserve, it makes all those stresses a little bit less stressful. So the things that I challenge you this week are to first identify one area where your ego, where you're spending money to impress others, is eating into your savings rate, your independence fund. And if you can stop that spending, stop it. And then commit to defining what enough means for you today, and consciously choose to stop moving that financial goalpost. When you get there, be satisfied. You're comfortable now. That's lovely. You can set yourself other goals and dreams and ambitions, and you can still keep building it. But you don't need a bigger house. You don't need that fancier car. They're not going to make your life better. Be happy with enough. So, consistent behavioral application leads to resilience and freedom, because survival and patience are the ultimate financial skills. So, if you want to read the entire book, I highly recommend it. I think it was a decent book. I'm not going to lie. I don't think I love reading about money. But if you listen to any sort of, I will listen to some podcasts and YouTube videos on finance and stuff, and almost all of them say, for the most part, it's not very good. It's not like a fun topic. But I think this book is a really good book to read, especially if you're starting to think about how to view money. So, and it's simple. It's a quick read. So you can pick up the book. It's The Psychology of Money, Timeless Lessons on Wealth, Greed, and Happiness. It's by Morgan Housel. So definitely check it out if you think it'd be used to you. And as always, be sure to check back in 2 weeks' time for the next episode of the podcast. But it's been great having you here this week. And until the next time, have a good one.
Thanks for listening to the Kyle Mackie podcast. If you got value from today's episode, take a second to like, share, and subscribe. Every listen helps this message reach more people, just like you.